Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we are going to go over 1d4, a complete repertoire for white, covering, well, every sensible defense for black. We're going to be covering 1d5, 1 knight f6, and every major defense, such as the Queen's Gambit decline, the Slav, the Semi-Slav, the King's Indian, the Grunfeld, and everything else. Now, the repertoire is based on ideas and understanding what to do even if you're out of book. So instead of memorizing endless lines, I'm going to focus on showing you how to approach certain types of positions. So hopefully after this, you will be equipped to play 1d4. You're not going to learn everything you're about to see in this video by just watching the video. Actually, learning a repertoire takes time, and I would recommend that you visit Chessbook by following the link in the description to do that. Chessbook is the best and easiest way to learn openings. It's available as a pre-made repertoire, so if you want, just go to pre-made repertoires for white and do that. You can also import the PGN, and then you can add specific lines to every part of the repertoire and personalize it, because what I recommend may not be best in every case for you. As you can see here, the repertoire is extremely effective, higher expected win rate than 83% of players on my level. It's also very sound, 96%. And what you can do then, you can study your repertoire. You can study everything that's due for review. You can view plans and model games in the opening, or you can just cover one variation you would like to study. Chessbook, once again, is what I have been using to study openings, well, basically since I discovered it. The repertoire is also available on my Patreon page. You can find it in the shop and buy it separately if you would like to get it that way. You can then use the PGN to import it into a Lichess study and continue building it that way if you don't want to use Chessbook. And you can also support the channel by joining Patreon, becoming a member, and gaining access to all of these repertoires and much more for just $3 a month. All of this plus more than 500 posts, videos, and basically my thoughts on everything is available for patrons, so check it out. Let's go back to the video 4. Now, we are going to begin with d5, and we are going to look at all the defenses after 1d5, starting with the Queen's Gambit declined. Now I know that the Queen's Gambit declined is perhaps the incorrect name. I have separated, for example, the Tarrasch and the Chigorin and the Albin into separate defenses. But what I mean by Queen's Gambit declined is the following position, in which after knight c3, black either plays the move knight f6 or bishop to e7. So we are going to be focusing on that first. So against the Queen's Gambit declined, white has many options, and I recommend the move c takes and the exchange variation. Why? Because I enjoy playing this with both colors. I play the Caro-Kann and I like the Carlsbad structure. So after e takes d5, bishop g5, c6, we get a typical Carlsbad structure, which is basically the exchange Caro-Kann in reverse. Now, you might think this is slow and positional in nature, but it can actually become very aggressive depending on what black chooses to do. So in the repertoire, which you can again download if you follow the links in the description, you will get a lot more detail into all the variations, but for now I'm just going to explain the basics. So after e3, white's goal is to claim both diagonals for the bishops first, so this one has already come out, the other one's coming to d3, and our plan is to play queen c2 and put pressure on h7, either provoking a weakness like h6 or forcing this knight to come to f8 to defend. At the same time, black has something to play for. Black is playing for the e4 square. This is the weakest square in the exchange Queen's Gambit declined and the exchange Caro-Kann, if you reverse the colors. And black has to play for the e-file. White has several approaches. White can play with knight e2, f3 and play for the e4 pawn break, which is considered to be the most aggressive approach. And white can also play for the minority attack with b4, b5, attacking the pawn on c6 and undermining the structure. That is what I recommend. Now, before we go into normal exchange lines, I have to show you some deviations. So after knight c3, black does not have to play the move knight f6. They can play bishop e7, and this is called the Czarusek variation. It avoids bishop g5 basically. After this you cannot play bishop g5 because you lose your bishop. So what we're going to do is we're going to develop the bishop to f4, and once again we are following exchange Caro-Kann lines, but as black in the exchange Caro-Kann you don't really get to play your bishop outside of the pawn chain. It's stuck inside, or white claims the diagonal first. So once again we have a very standard Carlsbad, but our bishop is not on g5, so that changes the position quite a bit. And after a move like bishop g4, you have several options as white. You can play bishop d3, which is the safest option. You can continue with knight f3, but I'm going to recommend something mad, something aggressive, g4. And this forces the bishop to choose a diagonal. It can go to g6, which is, well, in my opinion, suboptimal, because we have this move h4. And of course, black can take this pawn. It's not advisable to take this pawn because of queen b3. And now there's pressure on b7. You don't really have a way to defend, because if you move your queen, then I take your bishop. If you play the move b6, this is losing, because now I take on h4, and if queen takes on h4, then knight takes d5, and black is busted. What should black do here? If black doesn't take the knight, let's say black continues developing, then we have a very, very simple winning move, knight c7. And if black does take the knight, then this is absolutely losing after bishop b5 check. Let's say knight d7, bishop takes d7, king d7 and queen d5, and the rook is hanging. So after this move h4, black cannot take that pawn. So black usually plays h6 or h5 to provide a square for this bishop, because we are threatening h5. So after h5 we go g5. And we have a small edge. The bishop has a very nice square on h3 or on g2. The knight's coming to f3 or to e2, and we are slightly better. So after this aggressive g4, black's best is to retreat the bishop to e6 to avoid all of these problems. And now the same variations after h4 don't work as well, and black actually can snap off this pawn because there is no knight d5. The bishop defends. So bishop h4, we continue with queen b3, exploiting the b7 square. And if black plays something like b6, then we continue with knight f3, and once again black is sort of in trouble because we have a lot of pressure on the king side, and that's really not easy to defend. So after queen b3, black's best is to play g5. And I know that these variations look mad, but the reason I want to play them against the Czarusek variation is because no one is going to know g4 that well on our level. Maybe on grandmaster level, but g4 is an extremely aggressive move and no one's going to be used to that. So that's what we're going to do against bishop e7. And as I said, against knight f6, there are many different approaches, but we are going to be playing bishop g5. Black can play bishop e7, knight bd7, black can play bishop b4. All of that is in the repertoire. I don't want to go into all of those lines because this video would be 7 hours long. So let's just, for the sake of argument, look at c6, which is the main move, e3. Now, black has the option to play bishop f5, try and claim this diagonal. That doesn't work as well because we have queen f3 and there are aggressive lines which punish bishop f5. So most people are just going to continue with the normal bishop e7. We claim the second diagonal, knight bd7, queen c2, and castles. Now this is the main branching in the exchange Queen's Gambit declined, where white decides where to put this knight. As I said, knight g2 is slightly more aggressive and has different plans connected to it because you have the option to play f3, e4. On the other hand, knight f3, which is what I recommend, plays for the e5 square and makes it harder to move this knight. And in some cases you may get to play knight e5 and f4, which is extremely aggressive. So something like rook e8 castles, knight f8, defending h7, and opening up the bishop, rook a b1, and black plays a5. Now, why does black play a5? Well, if we are allowed to just play b4 unopposed, then we could be better. So, for example, if, let's just give you an absurd example, knight g6, b4. Now, you could play a6, you know, trying to prevent b5, but it's no longer easy to prevent b5. And let's say something like this happens. I don't know what to play here, but let's say bishop d7. Now we can play b5, and black's position is crumbling. If you take, then this pawn becomes isolated, so this is obviously no good. The c5 square is weak, the b7 pawn is weak, so that's no good. If you don't take, again, I don't know what to suggest, but let's just say rook c8, then I can win this pawn. Okay, not rook c8, let's say queen c8 takes. If you take with the b pawn, the weakest square after a successful minority attack is c5, so white has the option to play a move like like a5, knight a4, knight c5, and set up a blockade of the backwards pawn, which is why on rook a b1, black really should play a5 and try to prevent that. So the basic strategy we are playing for here is the minority attack and trying to induce weaknesses on the queen side. And after something like a3 reinforcing b4, black doesn't have a way to stop b4 anymore, so black needs to find counterplay. And that counterplay comes in the form of knight e4 most often, playing for the e4 square and exchanging pieces. So bishop e7, queen e7. And now I recommend the move bishop e4 and knight d2, putting pressure on this pawn, and after f5, b4. And I honestly think that white has excellent chances in a position like this. Obviously, there are plenty of deviations, which we are going to see in the repertoire, but this is the basic idea we play for in the exchange Queen's Gambit declined. Now the Tarrasch. So, same position, d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, except, you know, black doesn't play bishop e7 or knight f6, they play the Tarrasch. And if you've seen my tournament games from the Dubrovnik Advent Open, you will know that I played against the Tarrasch for the first time as white, and I took on d5, which is, you know, the main move, and I was expecting ed5, which is the main move in the Tarrasch, but my opponent played cd, the Czech Gambit. And I'm going to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. And I knew that the move existed, but I didn't know any theory. So what I did was I took on d4, my opponent played knight c6. I had to spend a long time just trying to figure everything out so that I don't lose. I was worse at one point, but I won the game. However, now I have an improvement. So instead of taking on d4, we play queen a4 check. Why? When we play queen a4 check, and our opponent blocks the check, now we take on d4. You may think, well, we have developed their piece. True, but there's no knight c6 because our queen isn't hanging. So in the line where you take on d4 immediately, knight c6 is a tempo on the queen. You cannot take the knight because the queen is loose. When you force them to play bishop d7, queen d4 does not come with a loss of tempo. So this is my improvement to the Czech. E takes d5, queen takes d5, and now they can play knight c6 or knight f6. We're going to retreat the queen back to d1. Black, of course, has some initiative because our king side is completely undeveloped and black can move some pieces with tempo, but white is basically up a pawn and doesn't really have the problems I had in my tournament game. So after cd5, of course, cd4 is a rare move. Most of the time, you're going to be seeing ed5. And what I recommend against the Tarrasch is the very simple pawn of Caro-Kann in reverse. So we go knight f3, they go knight c6, let's say, and we go g3. When you play the pawn of Caro-Kann, you have this position, you just have it as black. And after knight f6, let's say, bishop g2, you're going to be playing against this isolated pawn. And after bishop e7, you could take on c5. That's playable, but I recommend that you don't. So castles, castles. And we are playing against the pawn on d5. So in many cases, we will have ideas like knight e5. if this pawn is sufficiently defended. So we're trying to remove defenders of the d5 pawn. So bishop g5. And after cd4, knight d4, h6. I recommend not taking on f6, but retreating the bishop. But you can see the basic idea. We're playing against this pawn, trying to set up a blockade, and we're going to play a3 to prevent ideas like knight b4. Our rook is going to come to c1. If allowed, we're going to play, the other knight into b5 to reinforce the blockade. And generally speaking, these are comfortable positions for white, because normally when you have an isolated queen's pawn, you want to attack. And there is no attack for now. Of course, you can mess it up, but black doesn't really have great attacking prospects in this position, in my opinion, and I just enjoy these for white. Again, I have a lot of experience in the pawn of Caro-Kann as black, so the mainline Tarrasch comes very naturally to me because I'm used to playing this. And I'll just show you exactly what I mean. So after e4, c6, d4, d5, takes, c4, knight f6, knight c3, and let's say bishop g5, I play the move bishop e6. And later on, I play g6 and bishop to g7. And I hope you can see the similarity between the two positions. The bishop is not on e3, it is going to come back to e3, so it's technically the same line, and it's just with colors reversed. So the Tarrasch I don't think should present any issues. We aren't doing anything extraordinary against it. We are just playing the most sensible main lines, which I think are the most comfortable lines. Now the Slav. When you get the repertoire, you will see so many lines in the chapter on the Slav, but unfortunately there is no way around that. So we are covering the Semi-Slav in a separate chapter, but the Slav on its own requires a ton of attention. You may have noticed that I recommend the move knight c3 on move 3 against e6 and c6. And this move gives a lot of flexibility because it supports e4, and it also introduces ideas of knight b5. So in many cases, knight c3 is going to be more useful than knight f3 because of pressure on b7, because of pressure on d5, because of e4, and it just does not prevent e5 in many cases, so that's the downside. So in any case, after knight f6, knight f3, we have the Slav, and black has many options. dc4, a6, g6 are just, the most common ones. Of course, e6 transposing to the Semi-Slav is also a move. There are also moves like queen b6 or bishop f5, but those are extremely rare. So dc4 you could say is the main line of the Slav. And against this we play the Alapin with a4. We are simply trying to play against b5. And I should say that if a move like b5 is played, then black is losing because we take and take and take with the knight. So that doesn't work. If black tries to move a6, trying to prepare b5, we are going to go a5, just not allowing that, and we are going to recapture this pawn. So on a4, black normally plays bishop f5, although there are alternatives, and they want to go e6 with the bishop outside of the pawn chain. Now we go knight e5, and we plan to recapture this pawn with the knight in many cases, so knight c4 is our idea. Knight bd7, for example. Knight c4, queen c7, and g3. This is our main setup. There are many alternatives. I have covered knight b6 and knight d5 instead of queen c7, which are very common moves. But generally speaking, this is what we are trying to get. A position similar in its nature to the one we saw previously against the Tarrasch, because we have this fianchettoed bishop. The other bishop is on one of these diagonals as well. Sorry, not this one. We are playing against the queen side, and we're trying to have a lot of piece activity. And also, as you're going to see, I recommend the Catalan against knight f6, e6. So this repertoire is sort of semi-kingside fianchetto based. So that's what we do in the main lines. The main alternative to taking is a6, which is the Chebanenko or the chameleon. And against this, I recommend c5, because there was a known game played by Alechin where his opponent played a6. He punished it with c5, and basically this inability to break the queen side justifies white allowing an easy e5 in the future, because when you close down the center on one side, breaking it on the other side becomes much simpler. So basically black has to play for one of these two now, but white has so much space and better piece activity that this is completely justified. So after c5, black has many options. Bishop f5 and knight bd7, amongst others. Knight bd7 is the main move, and we go bishop f4, simply because we don't want to shut our bishop in. If we decide to play e3, we don't have to. Knight h5 is the main move, and now the bishop drops back to e2. And if the knight comes back, you don't play bishop f4 repeating. We go queen c2. Okay, black really doesn't have a future for his bishop on e7, so g6 is the main setup, and g3, we don't want to shut in this bishop. Bishop g7, bishop g2, and castles, castles. Now, black is going to play for e5. That much is clear. So we can play a move like rook ad1, and after something like knight f8, we can play queen b3. And we can play for e4 if allowed. We can try to put pressure on this pawn and prevent b6. And basically, all we have to do is fight against e5, and if black doesn't play it, black is going to be worse. So if you turn on the engine here, it's going to say white is slightly better, and black needs to play extremely precisely. The engine recommends moves like knight e6, or rook a7, or a5, which to my human eyes don't really look comfortable. I mean, I understand rook a7, you want to defend the b pawn and move the bishop, but many humans are going to get confused here. We're also looking at the famous Slav with g6, which is sort of a combination of a Grunfeld with c6 and sort of a modern Grunfeld. I don't think that's too challenging. We're just going to exchange cd, cd, and go bishop f4 and have slightly better pieces. Again, it's nothing too ambitious, it's just very comfortable. Now the semi-Slav. So when black plays e6 in the Slav, that becomes the semi-Slav. And as you know, the semi-Slav has been my main weapon as black for years. There is one variation I fear. Well, there are two, but one of them can be forced. So we are going to play the most aggressive line you can think of in the semi-Slav, the Shirov-Shabalov Gambit. So e3, knight bd7, and we don't play bishop d3, the Meran, we play queen c2, the anti-Meran, and black hopes that, we continue with bishop e2 or bishop d3 or b3, normal moves, but no, we go g4. And this gambit is extremely dangerous. Now, black can take it. Black should not take it. Personally, I play the move bishop b4 here. When I face the Shirov-Shabalov, I think it's a very comfortable idea of weakening the e4 square or eliminating this knight from controlling e4 and then just exchanging pieces. I leave this pawn b. There are other moves. The main move is h6. You can take on g4, and there's also dc4. I have covered all of them in the repertoire. For now, let's just have a look at what happens if black takes the pawn, because this is the main idea in the repertoire. Well, we develop with tempo, attacking the knight, attacking the pawn, and black's best is to defend the knight indirectly by attacking our knight. If they take on h2, which is playable, we exchange and take on g7. Now, of course, white is down a pawn. But this pawn is hanging. Black has to defend with something like, knight f8. That's not comfortable. That's not easy to play. This bishop is still shut in, so black is going to have to play e5 or c5 at some point. And we can castle queenside quite comfortably, and this bishop can come to d3. So it's very hard not to prefer white. And h6, the main move, which just prevents g5, is... well, it's good, but it weakens the kingside permanently, so that means that black's never castling kingside. Let me explain why. After rook g1, of course castles should not be played, But let's just say black does castle, because, you know, I dream of someone doing this one day against me. You can play h4 or g5. This is a hook, and it means that you're going to open up the position regardless of what black does. I prefer to move h4 here, and if this knight doesn't move away, g5 is coming. So let's say the knight does move away. g5, black tries to keep things close with h5, but now just g6. And yeah, this is hardly playable for black. So basically, after h6 rook g1, black has committed to never castling kingside, and black needs to play aggressively to open up this bishop. This is the reason I don't play h6 against the Shabalov myself. So black plays e5, we take on d5, cd5, and knight b5. Whenever e5 is played in the anti-Meran Semi-Slav, by exchanging on d5, we usually get access to d6 and c7 because we weaken the b5 square. Of course, cd5 weakens b5. And the bishop, you know, can move back, which is not good, or it could go to b8. And now my favorite way to approach this position is to play bishop d2, rook c1, and knight c7, and grab that bishop. The engine is going to say that black is equal, but of course, I mean, you played g4, so you cannot expect to have a massive advantage. It's a very risky move, but I still think it's much more comfortable for white to play. So against the Semi-Slav, we are going, you know, with a very aggressive approach. The QGA, excuse me, the Queen's Gambit accepted. So d4, d5, c4, and they take. When they take, white has many options. Knight f3, knight c3, e3, even a4 is playable, but we go e4. This is grabbing the bull by the horns and playing the most aggressive way, punishing black for taking the Queen's Gambit by expanding in the center. This is the same idea you get in the King's Gambit and in every other gambit. Now, black has one way to play against this, to prove that DC wasn't a bad move, and that's e5. There are other moves. You can play knight f6 or knight c6, but e5 is the critical line. And we go knight f3. They take on d4, we take on c4, and now they have to tend to this pawn. Knight c6. There are other moves. There's bishop b4, everything's covered in the repertoire, but knight c6 is the main idea. And you can see that black hasn't really moved anything yet on the king side. So in many of these positions, black could be in trouble on the king side. So after something like bishop e6, bishop b5, bishop c5 defending the pawn, we can even consider moves like b4. And after bishop b6, a4. And, you know, black hasn't castled yet. So it's very risky to do this for black, and that makes the Queen's Gambit accepted, in my opinion, a very risky opening after e4, e5. So that's what we're focusing on. Now, other moves like knight f6 are not as critical. We can go e5, knight d5, bishop c4. We just have a slightly better central position and, you know, a bit more space in the great bishop. So, and the same goes for knight c6, just defending the pawn. We go knight f3, attacking the pawn. Bishop g4, d5, knight e5, bishop f4. In all of these lines without e5, we're going to get back the pawn on c4 eventually, and unless, you know, black commits to something crazy like b5, at which point we can go a4, and we are better. So in this line against the Queen's Gambit accepted, e5 is really the only critical move we have to look at. Now, the two rare defenses in the Queen's Gambit, d4, d5, and c4, knight c6, the Chigorin. I should also mention that this is playable as well, knight c6 immediately. This has a name, it's called the Mykonos Defense, and we are going to go c4. Black, of course, can transpose to the Chigorin with d5, but the critical move is e5, and I just think that this is close to unplayable, because we are transposing to a sort of Nimzovich defense without us having played e4, so we have a lot more flexibility. Not that we aren't going to play e4 in most cases, but it's just, yeah, strange. Do not play d6 here, it's not good. I recommend the simple e4 and transposing to a sort of well, what do you call this? I don't even know, but basically something close to the old Indian or the Czech Benoni if black advances, where white has a ton more space and black needs to play for f5 at some point. Now we have f3, the knight isn't on f3, we have bishop e3, knight c3, very natural development. And if I were you, I wouldn't even burden myself with learning theory here. Just go c4, e4 and, you know, take up space. But the Chigorin is slightly different. There are many ways to fight against it, and the main move is knight c3 or knight f3. What I recommend is taking on d5. Now, we gain this very crucial tempo with knight c3, but not yet, because the d-pawn is hanging. If we could go knight c3 straight away, that would be great, but we need to defend the pawn first, and this gives black time to play e5. If black does not play e5, then we simply go knight c3, and then knight f3, and then e5 cannot be played, b5 is coming. So let's just say they make a random bad move. Something like this. Knight f3. And now what do? e6? Well, bishop b5, knight e5. This is close to a big advantage for white. So against e3, black plays e5. We gain our tempo, but e5 has been successfully played before knight f3. So bishop b4 is playable after e5, unpinning, they take, we take with the b-pawn, and we have this broad center that cannot be undermined with c5. Our development is fairly natural. We are going to go knight f3 and bishop e2 and, you know, just castle and play this the similar way we approach the Grunfeld, as you're going to see. Now, there are other moves, I have covered them in the repertoire, but this is the basic idea. The Albin. So what happens if black plays the Albin Counter-Gambit with e5? Now, against this, I have chosen a very, very simple approach. We just take on e5. Black, of course, goes d4. We go knight f3. They go knight c6. This is all mainline stuff. And now, instead of playing g3, which is the main move, we play a3. The idea behind a3 is to prevent bishop b4, to prevent knight b4, and most importantly, to play b4 and bishop b2. And honestly, if you go for this setup against the Albin, I don't see black equalizing anytime soon. So black's main idea is knight e7, knight g6, and grabbing this pawn. And that's fine. However, by the time black does that, well, we are already much better. Let's say they take. We can take, they can take, and we can just grab the pawn on d4. I mean, I don't see how you should prevent that. So the pawn isn't technically hanging yet. In most cases, black plays a5, trying to disturb this pawn. So we chase the knight away. They take, we take, they take, and now we can take with the queen or with the bishop. I recommend taking with the queen. The c-pawn is hanging. Be aware of that, but when we trade everything, and when they take on c4, we now have the move e3, and we have a slight lead in development, a bit more space on the queen side, and I just like white's position. I don't think it's anything major, but it's a slight edge. And you don't have to take on e5 or on d4, or you can just take on d4 straight away, which is also nice. This is what I actually recommend. And after queen takes d4, if knight f3 is played, then, you know, they aren't taking the c-pawn, so this is just great. Queen d4, bishop d4, and we're up a pawn. So against the Albin, I recommend this idea with a3, b4, and bishop b2, and I think that's very comfortable. Now we are moving away from 1d5. So d4, and we're looking at the Dutch. Now, the Dutch can be played two different ways. Either they go e6 on move 1, which is rare, or they go f5. And when they go e6, we don't have a choice but to play our usual flexible moves that can lead into many different openings. So we are going to go c4. Now, From here, black can play d5, transposing into the Queen's Gambit, declined. Black can play c5, transposing to the Benoni. Black can play knight f6, in our case transposing to the Catalan. Black can play, bishop b4, a million different moves. But they can also play the Dutch. Now, the difference when they play the Dutch straight away is because we have a lot more options. And I'm going to recommend something that you may not expect, but I'm going to recommend the Staunton Gambit. This is the From Gambit with an extra tempo, and in my opinion, there's no reason not to play this against the Dutch. So, black takes. We go knight c3, threatening to recapture the pawn. They go knight f6, we go bishop g5, threatening to take and recapture the pawn. Knight c6, and now we play d5. Knight e5, and there are two main ways to play here, queen e2 or queen d4. I recommend the move queen d4, knight f7, and again, there are many moves here, but we go h4. And the idea is, we just want to keep advancing, prevent black from ever castling king side. This pawn is still secure. We are castling queen side on the very next move, and obviously we have a ton of initiative. So after c6 castles, I believe this is very promising. Not many people are going to know the combination of queen d4 and h4. So you may get a position like this, queen b6. We decline the queen trade, of course. Knight takes d5, knight takes d5, c takes d5, queen takes d5, where the h file is open, the f7 square is weak, the bishop may come to c4, and the knight may come to f4. I just love this for white. So this is what we do when they start with f5. If they start with e6, we obviously cannot do that. We are not going to go into a French, even though I was really tempted to recommend that you go into a French, because I do personally. If you haven't seen the video on the e4 repertoire where I recommended the Tarrasch French, you should. I just love the opening. But for now, against the Dutch, we are going to stick to the principled d4, c4. And again, black has many moves, but if they play the Dutch, we are going to play the main line, g3. And black can play many things, but not the Leningrad. At least we have eliminated g6 setups because they started with e6. So they are basically committing to either the stone wall or the classical. If they play the classical, we're going to go bishop g2, bishop e7, knight f3, castles, castles, d6, knight c3. This is all main line stuff. If you have seen any of my recent training games, I had this position with black about 1 million times. Most people play queen c2, but we're going to go b3. And our position will be to go bishop b2 and rook e1 and play for e4 very simply. Now, if they, instead of bishop e7, play for the stone wall, we are going to play my favorite position in d4, c4 openings, which is, playing correctly against the stone wall. So we castle first, and then we play this tricky idea of b3. In the stone wall, this bishop is the worst piece on the board, and we want to exchange black's best piece. Other than the knight on e4, the bishop on d6 is by far the best minor piece black has. So now we're setting up a threat. And I only had this in one tournament game, and my opponent blundered by castling. And it's not immediately losing, but we go bishop e3, and this forces the exchange of bishops. And black plays the stone wall and compensates for the bad piece with attacking pressure, and it's really hard to do anything without this bishop. Which is why most people after b3, who know what they're doing, are going to go queen e7, preventing bishop a3. Against that, we go a4, reinforcing the threat. And, you can castle, you can do whatever you want, but you're not preventing bishop a3 anymore. So after, let's say, a5, bishop a3, bishop takes, knight takes, we have gotten rid of that bishop, and our knight is coming back into the game, and there simply is no attacking pressure. One of the things you play for here, when they exchange on a3, whether queen e7 is thrown in or not, is you recapture on a3, bring the knight to c2, not to b1, and then you play knight ce1, knight d3, and you play for the whole on e5. And my only tournament game against the stone wall where I played bishop a3 successfully was won precisely because of that. I had two knights, one on d3, one on f3, dominating the e5 square, and eventually my opponent's position crumbled. So that's what we do against the Dutch. Now, I've divided the Benoni into three different Benonis. The modern, the closed or the Czech, and the Benko Gambit, even though it's not really a Benoni. Against the modern Benoni, we're going to do something that I learned from Faustino Oro. And after knight c3, ed, cd, d6, we're going to play knight f3 and bishop f4. This is uncommon. And most people who play the Benoni are not going to be used to a position where white has not played e4. I constantly keep forgetting the name of Oro's opponent in that game, but he was playing some FIDE master and he destroyed him with this setup. So we are focusing on developing, creating a square for our bishop and not committing to e4, because when there's no pawn on e4, black really doesn't have a target. And our bishop on f4 does an excellent job of preventing knight e5, attacking d6, so just, you know, by force preventing a move like bishop d7. So here, after bishop g7, h3, if you play knight d7, I just take your pawn. So castles, e3, and once again, knight d7, a move you would like to play, loses the pawn. So black already has to be very, very careful. And we still have ideas like knight d2, knight c4 coming up, putting more pressure on d6. So I feel like this is a very comfortable setup where we aren't risking much and we have thematic ideas that black doesn't necessarily have to know about. So that's what we do against the modern Benoni, and you will see a lot of ideas in the repertoire. If you know my tournament games, you will know that against the Benko, I always used to take twice. I used to fully accept the gambit and play that line where white plays king f1, recapturing the bishop, then goes g3, king g2, and I used to play it with a4 and knight b5. I'm going to recommend something different. After having explored the Benko for a long time, I've decided to settle on queen c2. And I think this is a very, very interesting move. I don't think the variation has a name. But basically the idea is, well, you know, what are you going to do? I'm just defending my pawn and I'm going to go e4. So the idea behind queen c2 is to go e4 and then recapture on c4. So if you want to spend time on b5 and taking, that's fine. So, I mean, black doesn't have to take. Black can go g6 or d6. Against all three moves, we just go e4. But let's say they take. e4, d6. We just took back our pawn. And, okay, black managed to trade the b-pawn for the c-pawn, but what's the big deal? I mean, the pressure black normally has in the Benko is much harder to withstand if you fully accept the gambit. In this case, we haven't accepted the gambit, we just have a slightly better position. So bishop g7, both sides castle, knight c3. I don't know, bishop a6 is one of the moves, but they can also go knight d7. Rook e1, knight b6, bishop f1. When they go knight d7, create a square for the bishop on f1. And basically, if black doesn't play e6, there isn't much going on. But when they do, they are worse, because we can now go bishop f4 and start applying pressure on the pawn. This is one of the key positions you have to remember. You can go rook a d1 because d4 is a bad move. After d4, we can go knight b5 and play for the c4 square. We can go b3, knight a3, knight c4. These pawns are overextended, the c-pawn is hanging, and it's really not easy to defend. If the rook defends, we can take on a7. We also have knight d6 and bishop d6, so basically black is just losing a pawn. So, and of course, black isn't worse after queen c2, or not much worse. And it's not like it's a revolutionary approach to the Benko, but it's just revolutionary for me. I think this is the first time I felt comfortable against the Benko Gambit, ever. So this is what I would do in a tournament game today. Oh, this is my favorite chapter. The Czech Benoni, or the closed Benoni, is a schematic opening in which black plays for one thing, knowing more than white. And we are gonna change that. Oh, how the turntables, if you watch The Office. So we're gonna play a move I can guarantee black has never seen. Now, this may sound strange, but what we are gonna do is we are going to put our knights on c4 and c3, then maybe even e3, and we are going to dominate the entire board without playing c4. We begin our setup with the move knight e2. This is already strange, and it has been played in 6 games in total. Once it was played by a guy named Gerald Hertnik against Artur Yusupov. That's where I got the idea for the move, and I think this is the first time. That was the first time the move was played. Now black has, you know, moves. They can go bishop e7 or g6 or knight d7, but let's say knight f6, which is the main move. It also attacks e4. And now we go knight d2. It may seem absurd to block both our bishops, but watch what happens. Bishop e7, a4. Okay, we want to make sure that if the knight reaches c4, it's not misplaced. Let's say black castles, knight c3, blocking our c-pawn because it's not moving. Now if black goes knight a6, we are going to take it. So, I mean, they could go knight d7, that's fine, but if they go knight a6, we take, and go knight c4. Now look at this. Look at our nice knights. Queen e2, f5 is coming. When f5 comes, we take it, and we go knight e4. Now, how do you defend your d-pawn? Good luck. This is one of the reasons we play these weird knight maneuvers. Of course, black doesn't have to play knight a6. Let's say they play knight e8, playing for f5. Well, now we can go g4. And we just keep playing against black's pawn breaks. b5 and f5 are what black is playing for in the Czech Benoni. We just don't allow it. Now, let's continue with the King's Indian. So in the King's Indian, if you've seen any of my tournament games in the last 2 years and every single one of my training games, you will know that I enjoy the semi-Averbach. So instead of playing knight f3, we are going to play bishop e2 and bishop e3. This is a very aggressive setup. Its main idea is to prevent f5 by force by playing the move g4, which is why you don't develop your knight to f3, because you want 2 pieces controlling g4. Black can play this 2 different ways. e5 like a King's Indian, or c5 like a Benoni. I've covered both. I slightly fear c5 and I prefer playing against the King's Indian, but then again, most people who play the King's Indian are going to play e5. So on e5 we go d5, and black has a plan. Come into c5 and attack the pawn on e4. That can be done with a5 or without a5. It can be done with knight a6 c5 or knight d7 c5. And what I'm going to say now is the most important thing you have to know about this position. Since we are committing to g4, so let's say a5, g4, castling kingside is going to be very difficult. And it's very likely that we will at some point castle queenside. Why did black play a5? Well, they want to secure the c5 square and prevent b4, but they also want to play a4, a3, undermining our structure. I have lost the tournament game because of this pattern. Since then, I have learned that playing b3 in many of these positions, even though the engine evaluation goes from plus 0.7 to plus 0.3, prevents black's main source of counterplay. So let's say knight a6, h4, knight c5, f3. And black, of course, should go h5 here. You will see the main line theory in the repertoire. But if they do other stuff, like knight e8 and they play for f5, and we eventually decide to castle queenside, then playing this move b3 is extremely valuable, because on a4 we can go b4 without allowing en passant. And of course, if we ever play a3 ourselves, preparing b4, then black plays a4, creating a square for the knight on b3, and we are strategically close to losing. So I love the move b3. I wouldn't recommend that you play it here. Here I would recommend h5 and just blasting through the king side. But the move secures your queen side position. Now, this position and similar positions can go 1,000 different ways, depending on what black does. Black should accept this. h5, g5, knight h7, and after queen d2, they should go f6. This is the engine recommendation. I think it's completely insane, but okay. However, most people are not going to do that. I've played this in more than 10 tournament games. No one has played this. So, and I faced 2 international masters, 2 FIDE masters, and many candidate masters. So, yeah. In any case, the semi-Averbach is an attempt to attack black and to prevent black from playing the typical King's Indian stuff they are normally used to. Now, the Grunfeld. In the Grunfeld, again, if you've seen my tournament games and my training games, I recommend bishop g5. And bishop g5 is the Stockholm variation, and the idea is clear. If they go bishop g7, we just win a pawn. Not that this isn't playable for black, and black has a ton of counterplay, but on our level, anything below, grandmaster level, being up a pawn is a good thing, and it's very unlikely that black will compensate for the pawn. This is one of the main lines in which, I mean, we are up a pawn. And black is fine, of course, but we are up a pawn. So most people against bishop g5 are going to play the good move, knight e4. We save our bishop, they take on c3, and now they take on c4. And they can keep that pawn. If they play bishop g7, which is fine, we go e3, and the point is we have a secure 3-pawn center against the Grunfeld, which is very hard to break. Black's main idea in the Grunfeld is to blast through the center and activate this bishop. And since we have pawns on c3 and d3, that's not possible. So most people against the Stockholm are just going to win a pawn and play the move bishop e6. Now, sure, black is up a pawn, technically, but this bishop is great, this pawn is weak, and the engine is going to say equal, but I really prefer white. Firstly, because there is no typical counterplay for black that you normally get in the Benoni. Secondly, because you will likely get the pawn back, or this pawn, if black isn't careful. So that's what I recommend. Once again, getting black outside of their comfort zone. Many people have been asking me, why don't you play the Catalan? Well, I've started to play the Catalan, and against c4, e6. Previously, I always used to allow the Nimzo with knight c3. Now I recommend g3, but I don't recommend going into the standard open Catalan lines. Instead, after d5, bishop g2, bishop e7, knight f3 castles, I recommend the move queen c2. And if this pawn is taken, we simply recapture it with our queen, and we play against this bishop. Now, of course, black can play the closed Catalan lines, they can play c5, they can take the pawn. Either way, I think white has a slightly more comfortable position after something like this. And we have avoided most of the complications that white can face in the open Catalan. We have avoided going into those 7 main lines of the open Catalan by simply, playing queen c2, queen takes c4. And we have a simple position in which white always has a bit more pressure because white has a better light squared bishop. Now, of course, there are many lines, such as the closed Catalan, that you have to know, in which black is playing for e5 or c5 and white is playing for e4. But again, these are going to be slightly more comfortable for white because of this bad bishop. Now, the lines are in the repertoire. I just wanted to focus on ideas here. The Budapest. Now, if you've seen my training games, you will know that I struggle against the Budapest, so I did some work. We take the pawn, and I should firstly say that knight e4 is a blunder, and the way to punish this blunder is to go a3, to prevent bishop b4, which is black's only idea after knight e4, and after a3 black is busted. I don't know how else to put it. They're going to try d6, but we don't help them develop. We play queen c2. The knight must move away. Now we take, and we go knight f3, they castle, we go knight c3, and we just have a massive advantage here. If you turn on the engine, it's going to say +1. The best move for black is queen f6. But most people are not going to play queen f6, they're going to play moves like bishop g4. And now we simply go g3 and bishop g2, and later on we go b4 and bishop b2. And we are the ones attacking. We have given back, we have prevented black's typical counterplay. So most people who play the Budapest are going to play knight g4, because that makes sense. Normally, I would always play knight f3 here, but I did some work on e4. And e4 is an extremely interesting line that should get black out of their comfort zone. Now they get a pawn back, sure, but we go f4, and black can go knight c6 or knight g6. Most commonly people go knight c6. We go bishop e3, they check, fine. We can go knight d2, or knight c3, I prefer knight d2. Queen e7, putting pressure on the pawn, we have to defend the pawn. Knight a6 is one of the most common ways to play, getting the knight to c5, attacking the bishop. Queen e2, knight c5, and we castle queenside. Now, most people who play the Budapest want to go, a5 and rook a6 and bring the rook here and checkmate us. That's not happening. In fact, black is in grave danger here if they don't know what they are doing. For example, d6, which is fine, knight f3. If they castle kingside, well, we can save the bishop with bishop c2. Let's say they develop with bishop g4. h3, they should take, because there's really no future in keeping the bishop on e6. And we take, the g-file is open. The engine says equal, but it's not equal. This is not equal, the g-file is open. This bishop is going to become active after e5. I just think that playing e4 and f4 against the Budapest Gambit is going to give you at least a psychological edge. Now, let's continue with the Old Indian. The Old Indian is an opening I don't think you should devote a lot of time to. Just remember that you play e4 and that you don't take on e5. Instead, just continue developing, play bishop e2, castle kingside, play rook e1. In my opinion, if black plays rook e8, you should go d5, but you don't have to. And just treat this as a normal Marozzi bind type of position where you constantly have pressure on d6. Black is never going to take on d4, allowing your knight into f5 if they know what they're doing. And be careful about closing the position down with d5, because you give away the c5 square, so make sure that you can play b4. Black is usually going to play c6 and, queen c7, develop that way. I love these positions. I only had them in 3 tournament games, but I was always better, and I drew the last one after blundering a +20 position. But I don't think you should focus on the theory in the Old Indian. Instead, focus on just keeping this healthy space advantage, playing d5, and in an opportune moment, you may even consider playing knight e5 and d6, forking queen and bishop. And there are similar patterns throughout this opening. Now, to end the video with, there are 2 defenses, or 1 defense and 1 gambit. Firstly, let's do the Mexican defense, or the 2 knights tango, or whatever the obscure name is. I'm going to be honest and say that it's not an easy opening to refute, and it's not a bad opening by any means. It's perfectly viable, and I would recommend that you don't do anything crazy against it. The downside of knight c6 is, of course, that black's c-pawn is blocked, so your center is going to be more stable than in the main lines. So I just recommend knight f3, and black can play many things, but e6 is the main move. And now I recommend the move a3, because I want to prevent a typical Nimzo idea and the Nimzo transposition with bishop b4. So what's going to end up happening is that black is going to transpose to an old Indian, or a king's Indian even, with e5 later. But black has wasted the move on e6. So technically you get a king's Indian in which for some reason white has played a3 and black has played e6 and then e5. From a theoretical standpoint, a3 is definitely more useful than playing e5 twice. So I think white has gained something and white should have a small edge. So eventually black plays e5 and we get a typical king's Indian type of position where you can play d5. You can. And after d5, knight d4 is slightly problematic, so I don't recommend that you do that. So I recommend taking, queen d8, rook d8, and saying that, you know, we have b4 coming up. d4 isn't as weak. We can still fight for the square with rook d1, and the e5 pawn is weak. So, of course, this is close to equal, but I slightly prefer white. And finally, an opening I've covered in detail recently, the England. Now, before studying it, I have struggled against it. I'm going to show you literally 7 moves that are going to win you games. So, d5, knight c6, we play knight f3, and when they play queen e7, we play knight c3. Do not blunder with bishop f4. Just don't blunder queen b4. So, knight c3 first. Knight e5, bishop f4 now, and after they take and go queen b4, you go queen d2 and castle queenside. And that's the only thing you have to know. If they take the pawn, they are losing. Rook b1, queen a3, knight b5 resigns. Okay, so the pawn is immune. They have to do something like d6. And now you can castle queenside. It's suboptimal according to the engine. The engine prefers e4. But I personally like castles queenside and I don't see a big deal with it. The engine says e4 is plus 1.5, castles is plus 0.7, but let's face it, you're going to play castles queenside at some point anyway. And I just think that this is the refutation of the England. And regardless of which move you choose, you can play e4. Just know that castles is slightly suboptimal. Okay, so this is my d4 repertoire. This has been a long video and you're going to have to do a lot of work yourself. The repertoire I gave you is just the beginning. It's the basics. You're going to have to fill in a lot of gaps and go into a lot more depth depending on your level. If you are, I would say if you are below 1600, what I gave you is more than enough. But if you want to do this in tournament games, then you need to do your own prep as well. These should be guidelines that are going to steer you in the correct direction. Thank you for watching, let me know what you think, and download the repertoire from the links below. Stay tuned for more chess, bye bye.